We're in Acts chapter 20, and we quit last time at verse 32. Now I commit you to God and to the word of his grace, which can build you up and give you an inheritance among all those who are sanctified. Let's unpack that. I commit you to God. I think any serious believer is going to get into serious relationships. I don't mean romantic relationships. I mean just human relationships. And the reason is simple, because God has constructed the world in such a way, and us in such a way, that relationships are part of what give our lives meaning. All right, let's think about that for a minute and start here. There are at least two categories of people in the world. There are extroverts and there are introverts. Yeah, you're totally familiar with this idea. Extroverts get their energy from being around and interacting with people. Introverts get their energy from not being around and interacting with people. There is a third category I have discovered. It's called ambivert. And this is people who find energy from being with people and find energy from being isolated or what's the word I'm looking for? In solitude. I kind of would like to be an ambivert, because one or the other seems, well, it'd be great to be able to do both. But even an introvert needs the relationship of another person. Now, extroverts have many friends, and if you're an acquaintance, then you're a friend for most extroverts. Introverts have one or two friends, and the rest are just out there. And some introverts look at the rest of them as just white noise. Okay, but the point is, whether you are introverted or extroverted, whether you have this broad, wide open field of friends or not, relationships matter. I've discovered this as I've gotten older. I have become less of an extrovert as I've grown older, and I don't know exactly what to attribute this to. I have watched my circle of friends, which used to be pretty huge, shrink and shrink and shrink and shrink until, well, it's really small these days. This, coupled with, I'm being honest with you here, don't make too much of it, but I think it's probably worth me telling you, is that I struggle with depression. Not clinically, not the kind of depression that I crawl into bed and lay on my side in the fetal position, which, to be honest, is not a joking matter for people who are experiencing clinical depression to that level. That is a living hell. My depression is, I just call it a low-grade spinning depression. I constantly have to do battle with it, because if I give in to my depression, I isolate. This is not for solitude. This is for protection. Tons of lies in my mind that begin with, "You're not enough." I'm not smart enough. I'm not bright enough. I'm not witty enough. I'm not reliable enough. I'm not spiritual enough to have any reason to participate with other people. These are lies. My gosh, they feel like the truth. Well, I think I'm not the only one who experiences that. And when I experience that, my extroversion goes down to nothing. And yet, because when I'm experiencing that, I don't want to get out there and connect. I want to stay here, kind of with the covers pulled up over my head, metaphorically. I don't like myself, and I can't imagine how anyone else would like me, and so I isolate. But relationship is necessary. It's not just a good idea. It is essential. God uses relationships to comfort, to cheer, to refine, even rebuke us, so that we can become more and more conformed to the image of His Son. Well, okay, relationships. Now, if you're going to have a relationship, one of the downsides, maybe the biggest downside of a relationship, is that they don't really go away in the spiritual sense, but they do in the physical sense. People move. People die. People withdraw. So there is this difficulty with relationships. Paul had a deep relationship with the elders at Ephesus, and I'm sure not just with the elders, but certainly with the elders, and it's here in verse 32. As he was leaving, one of the things that he said was, I will never see you again. We will never lay eyes upon one another again. And this deeply, deeply saddened the elders, which is why Paul said, I commit you to God. How do you commit anything to God? Well, in the simplest way, you give it back to Him. You relinquish your ownership of it. Because if I give it to God, it can no longer be mine, right? But the good news is, from that perspective, God grants us the privilege of stewarding what we give to Him. And this is part of Paul's stewardship. I commit you to God. I try to do this every morning in my prayer time with my kids and my grandkids, to remember that they're God's, and I have been granted this great privilege of being Dad and Papa, but I don't own them. And then he says, and to the word of His grace. What is the word of His grace? I don't know what the one word would be. I don't think Paul's pointing to one word. I think he's talking about the fullness of what grace is. When Paul said, I commit you to God and to the word of His grace, I wonder, was he not saying, I am giving you to God, and I know that this means everything that God's grace is applied to you in that commitment to God. Or else, I want everything about grace to be applied, poured out in your life. This is a prayer worthy of every Christian friend in our lives. And one of the things about grace is that he goes on, which can build you up and give you an inheritance among all those who are sanctified. First of all, it can build you up. I believe it's not the only thing God does, but I believe God's grace builds us up. You know, I talked about the lies that are rolling around my mind in depression. Only grace can meet those lies with the truth that I can't do everything, and I'm not. There are a couple of ideas that I think are just absolute lies. One is you can do anything you put your mind to. No, you can't. Okay. The second one is when you do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life. Wrong. There's still going to be days when it is just work. And you may not have this terrific joy, but I will tell you this, God's grace can build you up. And so when I have these voices, and I don't hear audible voice, but when these messages are playing in my mind, what's the smartest thing I can do? I have to take a bath in God's grace. How do you do that? Well, I think for me, Scripture helps. Reminding myself, a friend of mine gave me a handle for. It's the Philippians 4:8 filter. Go look up Philippians 4:8. It says, set your mind on these things, and they're all positive. There's not a negative one on the list. Third is connect with people that love me and I love. Okay. God's grace, the word of his grace, can build you up. Remind yourself the truth that it's really about his grace. And if it's not about his grace, then whatever else it might be about is worthless. Because his grace can build you up and give you an inheritance among all those who are sanctified. It's only his grace that makes our relationship with God through Jesus possible. Only his grace makes it possible for Jesus to see us as we really are and love us as if we were Jesus. Intellectually, I get this. Emotionally, man, I get stuck. But it's true. His grace can give me an inheritance. What's my inheritance? His sonship, his friendship, his affirmation, his love, his acceptance, all the things that my heart most deeply longs for. Those are my inheritance because of his grace among all those who are sanctified. One last little shot at the idea that this is about relationships. If I am among all those who are sanctified, doesn't that set me in a relationship framework? It does. Maybe I was feeling like I needed to talk about relationships for me today, but maybe for you too. I'll see you next time on Soul Care with Stevie Boy.